I'd like to start with a kavana, an intention that we gathered together out of the brokenness of division and rights divested, of horrific gun violence, of a planet in flood and flames, watching yet another democracy weakened by extremists. We gather in community to seek wholeness and peace in the timeless wisdom of Torah. May we find together the shalom and the shleimut, the peace and the completeness that we seek. So today's opening question is, have you ever arrived at a place in your life that felt like true contentment?
I'm content.
You're content, you're there right now.
It's amazing. When I left my job, it took about a month and people thought I lost 10 years. The stress just went off and it showed right in my face.
And it's been pretty continuous since then?
Yeah, not bad.
Wow. What a great place to be.
I was just going to say, I don't know, because you asked the question in an interesting way. You said, have you ever arrived at a place of complete contentment? It implies a journey, and it implies a long period of not being content. And I would say that my contentment is a general state of being, that generally speaking, I am content in different amounts. And it comes intermittently, regularly, and sporadically, but I wouldn't say there have been long periods of discontent, either ascending to contentment or suddenly peaking to contentment. I think it's interspersed through my regular being. For what that's worth, Doctor.
Annette.
My experience is similar to Merle's. I think the best time in my life has been retirement. And like Merle, it probably took a little longer than a month, but I think within 6 months, I looked 10 years younger after retiring. And retirement has been the best time of my life. I never knew it could be so good. Life could be so good.
Right.
It's the first time in my life I've been in charge of my own, totally in charge of my own life. It's great. I recommend it highly.
This is like a PSA for retirement. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
It's
two
the only
satisfied customers.
It's the antidote for people who are afraid of age.
And I know so many people, I'm sorry to say most of them are men, who are fearing retirement because they don't know what they're going to do with themselves. And it's like, really?
Yeah.
Oh, my days aren't long enough.
Debbie, welcome.
Shabbat shalom.
So I wanted to catch you up on our opening question. Have you ever arrived at a place in your life that felt like true contentment?
I'm sitting there.
Okay. You want to show us?
Can you see the mountains? There are mountains, there's a pond. Is that the question? Or was it a person or a place?
Oh, I think it was just a place. And
Okay.
I think that's
Okay.
maybe a mental state is what I was thinking, but you can take it any way. And I think you went literal. And so that's fine.
I did because it is our place of contentment. We built it from scratch. So
Right.
it's become ours in every way, material, spiritual. Yeah.
Wonderful. Let me place us in liturgical time. So 2 days ago, we observed Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, the saddest day on the Jewish calendar. By tradition, many tragic events occurred on this day. The sending of the 12 spies occurred on Tisha B'Av by tradition, leading to the generation that died wandering in the desert. The destruction of the first temple, the destruction of the second temple, the crushing by the Romans of the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE, the expulsion of the Jews from England, and then from France, and then from Spain, and the list goes on. It's a remarkable set of coincidences for the state. And yet, at the same time, the Midrash says that the Mashiach, the Messiah, will be born on Tisha B'Av, which is a very interesting tradition, saying that out of our time of greatest bleakness will also spring our salvation. After the 3 haftorahs of rebuke that led up to Tisha B'Av, we now will read 7 haftorot, 7 weeks of consolation, known in Aramaic as the Sheva de Nechemta. And these will comfort us as we move towards Rosh Hashanah. To summarize the Parsha, this is a Parsha packed with meaning, with beautiful language that has been incorporated throughout our liturgy. A repetition of the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, repeating what had already been revealed in Exodus as God's direct utterance on the mountain, but this time with some subtle changes. The fundamental declaration of our faith, the Shema, in the first paragraph of the Shema. Now, one of the questions before we hop in, there were 2 sentences, and Merle, I see you turning around because I'm wondering whether you caught them, that we say in our liturgy. And in addition to the Shema, of course, did you see them, Merle, or anyone else? Okay, so one of them is in Deuteronomy 4:4. Va'atem hadvekim baranoi Elohechem chayim kolchem hayom. When someone is called up just as they're about to introduce the person for the Aliyah, that's what they say. And then there's another sentence or 2 sentences in Devarim 4:39 that are the end of the first paragraph of Aleinu. So in addition to obviously the Shema, which is the most famous one of all. Okay, so context. I think this is the first gathering that we've had this year for Devarim. And these are the final speeches of Moses that are delivered in the last 5 weeks of his life. Moshe knows he will not enter the land despite years of distinguished service as a leader. So the book is a desperate attempt on his part to leave a legacy and to extend his leadership to generations unborn. It's a book of looking back and looking forward, a rehashing of history and its lessons, and a warning about the challenges in living in the promised land after you've arrived. Sometimes the poignancy of these final days breaks through with stunning clarity. It's truly a capstone of Moshe's lifetime of leadership. The man who said at the burning bush, "I'm not a man of words," is now bursting with them. Hence the name of this volume, Devarim, which means sayings, but also things and matters. For in Moshe's skillful telling, words move from the intangible, sounds of the voice, symbols on a page, to the tangible, words that can inspire people to do big things, including simply to endure, despite repeated attempts to wipe them out. I want to give thanks to Rabbi Victor Reinstein, whose insight into the Shabbat Amidah informs this teaching. Okay, so the reference to the Shabbat Amidah, the central portion of the morning service for Shabbat, right after the Kedusha, the first words are Yismach Moshe b'matnat chalko. Moses was happy with the gift of his portion. It's very interesting because in a prayer that is supposed to be devoted to Shabbat, and the first thing it says is that Moshe was happy with the gift of his portion. And the question is, was he? And so we're going to go to the beginning of Va'et Hanan and consider this question. First, some quick context. In Bamidbar, people are grumbling because they have no water. The episode occurs right after the death of Miriam. The Midrash says that upon her death, the well that nourished the Israelites in the desert disappeared. God tells Moshe to take his rod, assemble the people, and in their presence talk to the rock until it yields water. Moshe, seemingly unprovoked, addresses the crowd in anger, crying out, "You rebels!" and strikes the rock twice with his rod, and the water comes gushing out. God is angry with Moshe for not talking to the rock as commanded. The stated reason, Moshe failed to sanctify God in the presence of the congregation. In punishment, God decrees that Moshe will not lead the people into the promised land. So we fast forward to Devarim, to the beginning of Va'et Hanan, where Moshe recounts to the people his attempt to reverse this harsh decree. So let's go to Deuteronomy 3, verses 23 to 25, okay? Annette?
I pleaded with the Lord at that time, saying, "O Lord God, you who let your servant see the first works of your greatness in your mighty hand, you whose powerful deeds no God in heaven or on earth can equal, let me, I pray, cross over and see the good land on the other side of the Jordan, that good hill country and the Lebanon."
Okay. So the first sentence, I'm going to skip for a second the word Va'et Hanan, first word, which is where the portion's name comes from. But it says, I pleaded with Adonai at that time. What time?
Probably when he hit the rock.
You're right. It's possible that maybe Moshe was recalling that immediately upon giving the decree, he came back and said, please. But actually, the tradition doesn't say that. But it's a good hypothesis. Ashley?
The only honest answer is who knows, but my read of this, it's really now. It's connected to, let me, I pray, cross over. That's in the present tense. That's the way I read it. I didn't think he was referring to a distant past. I once long ago pleaded. I think he's kind of relaying what just happened.
Okay. And that's taking it very literally to its peshat, right? So when I sent out the email, I said to read some materials, and some of it was the beginning of Va'et Hanan, but some of it was the part right before Va'et Hanan.
Right.
So a typical thing of biblical scholarship would be always take a look at what immediately preceded. Yeah. So what immediately precedes is the story of the conquest of those two mighty kings, Sichon and Og. And Rashi goes to that and says that Moshe was thinking, I've just had this victory. I've been able to lead the Israelites to victory. And not only that, but this land is part of the land of Canaan. Is it possible that the decree could be reversed? And Moshe is like hoping against hope that there's an opening. So that's another tradition. If anyone else has a read, yes, Annette.
I don't have a read, but when I read that, I thought, Rich must have made a mistake. What does this have to do with the rest of what we're reading? And I kept looking at the number and rereading and thinking, I don't understand why we're reading this. So thank you.
Yeah.
I almost emailed you and said, are you sure this is what you want us to read?
Yes, Nancy.
One question. This at the beginning of chapter 3, this conquering of all these other countries or nations. When does that chronologically happen?
So I think the march towards the banks of the Jordan and about to cross the Jordan and Moshe's death takes the Israelites through the land of Edom. And God says, don't bother with them. And then the land of the Moabites, and God says, don't bother with them. And then it's Sichon and Og, and God says, wipe them out. So this is, I think, right around this time.
So we're heading towards the land of Canaan.
Yes.
Okay.
So then Va'et Hanan, I just want to point out that word is a word of pleading. The word chen, if I find favor in your eyes, in matzati chen, this is a request for a gift. This is Moshe knowing that he doesn't merit what he's about to ask for, and he's asking for a gift. So let's go to verse 24, which Annette read. How would you describe what Moshe is doing?
Flattering God.
He's what?
Flattering.
He's flattering God, right?
Yes.
It's like, grand presence, God of all gods, best God, Adonai. Because, it's a prelude to the ask. Yes, Annette.
Well, he's flattering God, but he's also aligning himself. You who let your servant see the first works of your greatness and mighty hand. So he's flattering God, but he's also saying, I was there to see the first works of your greatness. So I'm special. I'm flattering you, but I was special because I was there to see it.
Yes, I like that. That's very nice. Thank you, Annette.
I would like to say that I agree with Annette because he's the instrument through which God's word, he is the mechanism whereby the people are brought to the lands.
That we think of Moshe as being very humble.
Yeah.
This is a humble sentence. It is not.
Yeah.
Right.
Although, with that gloss, maybe there's a little bit of pride in it, but you who let your servant see the first works of your greatness is still subordinating himself to the higher power, but it is sort of an appeal like, hey, we go way back. I was your partner, stick with me. Don't, boot me out as your running mate. This is, Dan Quayle's plea. Ashley,
I wanted to address Deborah's comments about the kind of weirdness of the translation, the Chabad translation. I think it's important to remember Moses is quoting himself.
Mhm.
Moses is speaking to the Israelites, soon to be, and he's saying what he had said to God.
Right.
And he's telling them what. So when he says all this stuff, oh Lord God, you who let your servant see, blah, 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 he's quoting himself.
yeah.
Maybe
So
it's obvious, but that's why the pronouns may be kind of weird.
So Ashley, it's great that you're pointing that out. And I'd like to, as they say, stick a pin in that, because we're going to come back to the fact that this is Moshe's telling of a prior event, which matters. Now, obviously, it raises all sorts of questions of reliability of narration and things like that. But it's helpful to keep in mind that this is his description of the prior event. So,
Yeah, and
yeah.
if I wanted to stick, I think there's something else going on here. In fact, I'm doing the Devar at the shul today, and I will mention it. You'll see a preview here. I don't think, I'd have to disagree with you, Rich, and I disagree not out of scholarship, but out of impulse.
Yeah.
I don't think he is trying to set his legacy. I don't think I think if he's trying to build a legacy, it is a legacy of God and the Jewish people and wanting people to remember. But I don't think it's personal glory, because what he's doing is cutting himself down. He is pleading, he's revealing his pleading in public, which makes him look like a lesser character, not a greater character. This is hurting his legacy. It's making him look less of the icon, less of the paragon. I couldn't even get in.
Yeah.
And I think that's telling.
So Ashley, I totally agree with you. And when I talk about legacy, it really is more about the teachings, the commandments. This is a moment of self-revelation that I'd like to stick a pin in this, because we'll talk about that a little later. It's interesting to say, why is Moshe being so self-revelatory? But anyway, can I pause there and then we'll come back? But I agree with your point 100%. Okay, so verse 24, oh God, wonderful, wonderful. But it's one sentence, and then he gets to his ask in verse 25. Let me pray, I cross over and see the good land on the other side of the Jordan, that good hill country and the Lebanon. Those first two words, Evra na, okay? So the second word na is please, right? So when Moshe pleads with God, when Miriam is stricken with leprosy in the episode of the Cushite woman, he says, El na rafana la, which is what we say in the Mishaberach. Please, God, heal her, please. Na, that's please. Evra comes from, you see the word root, ayin bet resh, ivri, avar, that's Passover. And so Evrana comes from the word root Passover. The aleph is from ani, Evra, like let me, and Evra from ata, so you let me cross over, please. That is an incredibly condensed phrase that, if you're going to translate it into English, requires more words than just two, just because the way Hebrew constructs and builds pronouns into the form. So what I wanted to do is to show you the attempts of translators to try to translate this. I've got several translations here. Okay, so these are translations of Evrana. I'm going to ask you to vote for your favorite. Okay, Evrana. Okay, and I mean, just imagine translators translating like the entire Torah. So I'm in awe of people like Robert Alter, and Everett Fox, who take on this thing. So the first one, Samson Raphael Hirsch, who translated into German. This is an English translation of his German translation. So we got a couple of layers here. But here is, let me cross over, I pray thee. Then we have the JPS, which we've been reading, let me, I pray. crossover. Then we have Robert Alter, let me pray, crossover. And then finally, Everett Fox, pray, let me cross over. So of these four, which one do you think is the best translation and why?
I like JPS.
Okay, why do you like JPS?
It flows better.
Yeah, Annette,
I like Everett Fox,
why?
because because it conveys the meaning, but it minimizes the number of words that are used. So I think it sticks more to the original Hebrew. In
That's
terms
great.
of, none of them are as poetic as the original Hebrew, which is what I was looking for.
And there is this real struggle between trying to get the spirit of the condensation of the Hebrew and then get something that flows poetically. Any other votes?
I would go with Everett Fox as well, not only because I happen to like him a lot, but I think what Annette said was very clear. I think it's the closest to getting to the way in which the Hebrew would conveys it. That is, in
Yeah.
the shortest number of words and the most direct meaning. So I would go with Fox too.
Okay, so 2 for Fox. Okay, Nancy.
I wouldn't drop the I,
Yeah,
because I feel like the Everett Fox is a little bit ambiguous about who's praying. Right?
Hmm.
It could be a command.
Mhm.
Pray.
Yeah,
That's right. Pray, it could be the verb, it could be said in different ways. You pray,
Exactly.
let me cross over, or I pray, right?
yeah, interesting. Let me ask you this. For those who are fans of the Everett Fox, Fox versus Alter. So what's interesting, and I put them in this order because you can see the words being leached out in these successive translations, which, roughly go from older to newer.
Mhm.
So what's the difference between Alter and Fox? And what do we think about that?
Why do they use the word pray instead of please? Is there a difference here? Because I don't know about Hebrew, but there's a huge difference between praying and asking politely or beseeching. What is
Yeah,
why use the word pray, which is ambiguous in English?
so I will say that when we went at the beginning of the study and we talked about ve'etchanan, and which is the word that is translated at that time I prayed, right? Ve'etchanan is a word that isn't used very often. Rashi goes to the chen in it, and his interpretation is that this is asking for something you don't merit. So it's really hard to convey the subtlety of that word. And I guess you could go in different directions as to what pray implies or doesn't imply. I do think that between Alter and Fox, the question of Moses's posture here and the fact that this is a prayer is put up front, even though in the Hebrew it's put at the back. And you could debate as to whether that is a better rendition of the translation or not. Okay. Was listening to a interview with Everett Fox where he was talking about the difficulties of translation. And he said, one of the hardest things to do is to not fall prey to trying to match what in English would match the Hebrew sense. And the example he gave was in Genesis, when it talks about the earth being without form and void, it uses the phrase tohu vavohu, if you remember it. Tohu vavohu. And he said, I always wanted to translate tohu vavohu as limbo akimbo. I love. He said, but I knew that, poetically it didn't really work, but as a matter of the sense of the language, it's perfect.
I
think poetically it does work. I disagree with him.
Yeah, okay. Well,
I spoke to a translator who did Yiddish to English, and she said, how do you translate a codicil?
codicil.
You translate, your firstborn, it doesn't work.
Yeah. It's funny, when you said a codicil, I was thinking you were talking about a codicil to a
That's what I thought. A
Yeah.
codicil.
No,
And I thought, that's a good pun.
the
Anyway,
it has meaning in Yiddish. It has, you need a paragraph in English.
yeah. One other thing with regard to this one bite at the apple, here that Moshe has to make a plea. He says, let me cross over and get a glimpse of this land. Let me see the land, this good land across the Jordan and the Lebanon. What do you make of that ask?
You know, one of the things that struck me in reading, I don't remember the exact order, but here all he does is ask. When the children of Israel had done the golden calf and God wanted to destroy the whole people, he fasts for 40 days, he begs, he lies on his, he lies on the ground and cries, and God forgives the Jewish people and doesn't destroy them. And here, he doesn't go to that extreme. He merely asks and accepts what's happening when it has to do with him.
That's a great distinction. I think it speaks to this notion that Moshe knows he's kind of going out on a limb here and doesn't really necessarily deserve it. And then also when he's pleading on his own behalf, he's modest. When he's pleading for someone else, he like really lets it all hang out.
He went the whole hog.
Yeah, he did,
Golden calf.
so to speak. Yeah.
Mhm.
His request is, let me see, right?
Mhm.
Anything? Go
It's a
ahead.
negotiating ploy. You want one thing. You really want one thing. You'd like to have one thing, but you'd settle for something else. So put them both in and you get denied, the ultimate goal. But then God says, well, but we'll let you look at it. Puts both in. He puts both in the ask package. He wants a percentage raise and a bonus. And he doesn't get the percentage raise, but they settle for a bonus.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead, Debbie.
yeah. This is a little, part of it is also how Moshe is to be remembered. And I think that has a lot to do with the plea. I don't think it's so much actually to cross over into Israel. It's to remain the figure who brought people to, who made the journey happen. And there I think is the difference between historically, did he actually bring into Israel? Maybe not, but he did bring them to Israel.
Mhm.
And and these become Moshe's, right? That's his legacy. That is the memory, which will be renewed, right? We renew it in liturgy. We renew it in our memories. It doesn't die. It isn't historical. It doesn't remain, an historical moment. It is renewed in our memory. That's why so much of this appears in our liturgy, right?
Yep, yep.
And each time we do that, we are remembering, we make it alive again, right?
But I agree that, Moshe is obviously potentially mindful of how he will be remembered.
Right.
But the main thing that I would like also us to walk away with is the modesty of the ask. And it is really, I just want to see, and it's not asking to continue to lead necessarily. Now, maybe it was, I'll ask for a little and then see if I can get more later. Certainly some of the rabbis comment that this is Moshe saying, you can let Joshua lead, just let me be part of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so now what I'd like to do is go to God's response in verse 26, which we have not read yet. Merle, would you like to read us verse 26?
But the Lord was wrathful with me on your account and would not listen to me. The Lord said to me, enough, never speak to me of this matter again.
Take a look at the first word in Hebrew, vayit aber, and there is this root again appearing. And this time God is crossing over into anger. That's the crossover concept in that word. And the words that God says are ravlach. Enough. Where have we seen these words ravlach or some variant of them before? Ravlach. The Korach rebellion. Let's go to Numbers, Bamidbar, chapter 16. verses 1 through 3.
Yep, I got it. Now, Korach, son of Issachar, son of Kohath, son of Levi, betook himself along with Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, and And, son of Peleth, descendants of Reuben, to rise up against Moses, together with 250 Israelites, chieftains of the community chosen in the assembly, men of repute. They combined against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You have gone too far. For all the community are holy, all of them, and the Lord is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourselves above the Lord's congregation?"
Thank you. Take a look at that third sentence and go in about 6 or 7 words. And do you see Rav Lachem? So in the Korach rebellion, Korach, or the people who accompany Korach, come to Moses and say, "You've lifted yourself up above the rest of the community." Rav Lachem.
Rav Lachem, yes.
Rav Lachem. Think about that in the context of God saying to Moshe, Rav Lach. Now let's keep going. In Numbers, Merle, if you're at 16, Numbers 16, read 5 through 7. This is Moshe's response to the Korach people who said, Rav Lachem.
Then he spoke to Korach and all his company, saying, come morning, the Lord will make known to who is his and who is holy, and will grant him access to himself. He will grant access to the one he has chosen. Do this, you Korach, and all your brand. Take fire pans, and tomorrow put fire in them and lay incense on them before the Lord. Then the man whom God chooses, he will be Holy One. You have gone too far, sons of Levi.
Rav Lachem.
Rav Lachem. So here's Moshe saying, oh yeah, you want to say Rav Lachem to me? Well, screw you, Rav Lachem to you. And so the words Rav Lachem are basically hurled at somebody for being too grabby. Let's go back to this point where Moshe is putting this modest ask, praises God, says, please just let me put a tippy toe into the land and see. And God says, enough, never speak to me again, Ravlach. And what he's basically saying is, don't be a Korach.
Okay.
Ouch, right?
Right.
That is not, I mean, it's one thing
But
to
wait, he doesn't stop there, because then he relents and he says, all right, go up and take a look.
well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. All right. But before we go to what happens next, going back to this whole notion that we've talked about, that Devarim is a rehash of the earlier telling, right? Or the earlier story. What I want to do is go to the earlier story that Moshe is talking about. And that goes to Numbers chapter 27, verse 12. Okay, so this is the Torah's account in real time, not through the words of Moshe, of what happened. And Nancy, if you can get to Numbers chapter 27, 12 through 20.
And the Lord said to Moses, go up to this Mount Abarim and see the land that I have given to the Israelites, and you shall see it, and you shall be gathered to your kin, you too, as Aaron your brother was gathered, since you rebelled against my word in the wilderness of Zin, in the community's dispute to sanctify me through the water before their eyes. These are the waters of Meribah at Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin. And Moses said to the Lord, saying, let the Lord, God of the spirits for all flesh, appoint a man over the community who will go out before them and come in before them, and who will lead them in and out on the march, so that the Lord's community will not be like a flock that has no shepherd. And the Lord said to Moses, take you Joshua, son of Nun, a man who has spirit within him, and lay your hand upon him. And you will stand him before Eleazar the priest and before all the community. And you shall charge him before their eyes, and you shall set something of your grandeur upon him in order that all the Israelite community will heed.
Okay, thank you. So this is the earlier story that Moshe retells at the beginning of Devarim and at the beginning of Et Hanan. So what's notable about Moshe's retelling as compared with the original story that Nancy just read.
He doesn't plead.
No
Right.
pleading, no rejection or anger from God. This is just a straight up narrative. God says, ascend these heights of Abarim. And by the way, if you go to the Hebrew, there's that word root, ayin bet resh again. Go up this mountain of, Hirsch translates this mountain of transition, because here's where we're going to do the passage of authority. But in Moshe's retelling, and this goes back to Ashley, your point earlier, right, about what's going on with Moshe and what he's revealing in Va'et Hanan, which is, to me, incredibly vulnerable of Moshe to be doing this. So what do you make of it? Why is Moshe being so candid with the people at this time?
Much of what my Devar is on today is about that very question. And this may be a somewhat perverse way of reading it, but so what? This has been the icon, the paragon of the Jews, without flaw, with incredible, and now he's not going to be. They've got to find a replacement, a new leader. And I think, in a way, this is his attempt to make it somewhat easier for them to find a leader, in that he is diminishing his stature and his role by, I mean, you got to wonder, why is he doing this pleading in front of everybody? He's had a private relationship with God. Wouldn't you plead in private and then keep it private? Why would you share it unless, in a way, you want to show the people that, hey, look, I'm not perfect. You can find somebody else.
That's a great explanation. I like that.
Mm.
You've clearly been thinking about it for this Devar, for your standing room only performance.
Can I
Yes,
ask a
Debbie.
question?
Yeah.
I'm getting a very confused portrait of Moshe. In one sentence, in one set of sentences, we want to make him humble. We want to make him modest. And in another, we are saying, how bold. Moshe is a complicated figure. And that's good. That's the way we should see leaders, as complicated, not as straightforwardly one or the other. But one of the problems, it seems to me, is that I have never found Moshe a particularly appealing leader, in part because I think his modesty is not just modesty. I think this is one of the most unconfident men I have ever met. He just goes back and forth. And if some people might even call him a whiner, oh, why me? I have all these problems. I don't speak rightly. I don't do. And there is something about Moshe that is slightly unappealing.
Yeah.
And I think maybe we're getting the full picture in the last Devarim, in the last words, in the last sayings.
Yeah.
We're getting that complicated man back.
So Debbie, I think Moshe is a complicated figure. And I do think that there are aspects of him to take issue with in various stories. But I would say in this little snippet that we have of Moshe's retelling, I don't feel a lot of pride or vanity. I feel a lot of vulnerability, supplication, modest ask. But I agree with you, he's a complicated figure. But the one thing I want to point you to is the word on your account in going back to when it says that God was angry with me on your account. That's in verse 26. And I think that's a really, the Hebrew is lama'anchem. God was angry with me on your account. And that is a weird phrase. I mean, because it sort of hints a little bit like it was your fault that I kind of lost my temper. It's like you're
Right.
whining. And so the only thing that I'll say here, that in the hagiography, right, of Moses, of, this leader par excellence, and trying to maybe whitewash some of the flaws a little bit. I think that the rabbis are very uncomfortable with that word on your account, and they twist
Mhm.
themselves into pretzels to come up with, in what way is Moshe's kind of whininess here and blaming in a way of virtue. And so I'll just give you one example of it to show you what a Jewish pretzel looks like. Sephorno says that Moshe had seen through prophecy that Israel would be exiled, and that his prayer to God was not so much on behalf of himself, but on behalf of the Israelite people, so that they should always stay in the land. And so he's saying, I pleaded for you, and that's why God got angry at me. Well, so that's just such a fabrication. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. But what I want to do.
Thank you for that, Rich. Thank you. It was very important to me, at least. That's where I started. It's just the concept of vulnerability, how you're using it. And because you're explaining vulnerability in one way, one could explain it quite differently, that personally he felt vulnerable, that it isn't about, it's about his own shortcomings. It's not so much about a modesty.
So let's go now, because this is, I think, where there's a lot of subtlety in this narrative. Let's go to 327. Annette.
Go up to the summit of Pisgah and gaze about the west, the north, the south, and the east. Look at it well, for you shall not go across yonder Jordan.
So I'm wondering how you all read this sentence. What is God's attitude towards Moshe and the situation in this sentence?
Well, I think it's what Ashley said. God's compromising with him and letting him look.
Interesting. So does Moshe need God's permission to climb up to the top of a hill and look at something?
Hey, if you're 120 years old, you need God's strength to.
So, well, he asked for God's permission. He asked to see Jordan.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether he needed it, but he thought he did.
Okay, so that's fair. It's a literal interpretation of he asked to see, and God says, okay, go ahead, look.
So,
There's something. When Moses went up the other mountain, the Sinai, there was a great big rebellion when he left them for time. So he needs God's permission, because God forbid what these stiff-necked, rebellious people will do while I'm on top of Pisgah Torah. So,
Yeah, that's interesting to draw that parallel. But let me ask you something. If God says to Moshe, who he knows is in despair because he can't cross over to the land, and he says, go up to the land, take a good look at it, you're not going. Is there not some edge?
Big time. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's like
Take a
saying
look,
to a
but you're not
kid,
getting in.
"Oh, look at the piece of candy,
Exactly.
but you can't have it."
Exactly, right?
I was there. It's supposed to be Har Nivo, and today, and I was there, and you can't see anything. Believe me, you don't see from the. And the thing that happened to me there was there's a mosaic there, and there was I think it was a Franciscan church that was put on top of it. And when I was there was a group of Italian tourists who looked just like tourists are supposed to look, but they were singing a mass, and it was an absolutely beautiful, almost concert for me. And I went outside, and they have a cross circled by Moses' serpent. And there was a sign there that said, Moses brought us the law, Jesus brought love. And at first I was really angry. I thought it was a put down. But then I realized you can't have life without law. And it doesn't say that Judaism doesn't have love.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting place to be.
Interesting. So here's what I want to do. I want to unpack this sentence a little bit, because there's some subtlety going on, and it's actually in the Hebrew and in the markings. And there are two things that I think that might alleviate some of the harshness of a straightforward reading that says, go take a look at the land, you're not going to enter it. The first thing is there is a pause after the word ale, go up. Now, in a way, Do you see that pause, the pasik, the vertical line?
Yeah.
That is a sign that is a sign of pause. Now, Merle, it's interesting, you talked about if you're 120 years old, you're not jogging up the mountain. So there is a sense that ale and then pause asks you to think about Moshe's slow ascent up this mountain after God has just rebuked him with these horrible words, Ravlach. So he's taking kind of a long journey up a mountain alone with his thoughts. You know, the question is whether during the course of that climb, he became more agitated or more reconciled. I think it's asking you to consider this scene with more time that puts it into real time. The next thing is much, much more subtle. It's in the cantillation. I'm just going to give you a very quick lesson in cantillation. Okay, we talked earlier about how the Eschanan has the Shema in it, right? So there's a lot of famous liturgy packed into the Eschanan. And take a look at, these are the two first verses of the Shema. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, ve'ahavta et Adonai Elecha b'chol levavcha nafshcha me'odecha. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your might. Okay. Shema Yisrael. Would everybody agree that that's a clause, Hear, O Israel, and there's a pause and pause? Look at this little upside down wishbone. Okay. That's a place of pause. Then go to the next sentence. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. You shall love the Lord your God. And then the next thought is with all your heart, soul, might. There's the wishbone again. All right. So I just want you to be aware that in the cantillation and in the reading, the wishbone indicates pause. All right. So now when you go to 27, the first word was ale, right? Go up. Rosh HaPisgah, to the top of Pisgah, which is a peak. V'sa einecha, cast your eyes. Yama tzafona v'teimana v'mizracha, the four directions. Ure'eh be'einecha, look with your eyes. Do you see the wishbone?
Yeah, there it is, right where, yep.
And we're going to go back also to Etayardain. There's the pause, this Jordan. Cast your eyes, four directions, yonder Jordan, this Jordan. Look with your eyes. And there is a pause before you're not passing over the Jordan. So what does the pause after look around communicate to you?
Giving him time to look around.
And what? Is he just looking? What else might he be doing as he looks?
Absorbing the beauty.
Could be the beauty.
Yearning. He's,
Could
I
be
mean, by
yearning.
looking around, he is appreciating his punishment because he's seeing what a beautiful, incredible place he is not getting into.
Right, but he could he also be appreciating the fact that he's brought them to the cusp of this?
Yes, I was gonna
That's
say
what I would say.
appreciating what he's done for his people and what they're going to have and what future generations are gonna have.
Right,
That's what I said earlier.
exactly, Debbie, you made that point.
I made
right?
that point about
Yeah.
10 minutes ago. Yeah,
Right.
that's where, and I think this summarizes Devarim in so many ways about the future, how the future is inherited and how we come to remember it. And I think that's the whole Parsha deals with that. It deals with life and living and regeneration. I see that in every sentence. I want to ask you a question about going up. Aliyah. Could it be also the understanding of going up as we know it to making Aliyah?
I view Aliyah as going up to a higher place.
Yeah.
The implicit is that, you know, the land of Israel has elevated spirituality. That's what I always think of as when I hear Aliyah. So
Yeah.
there is a way of come close to me, come to a place where we'll be able to commune. Moshe is getting this glimpse. He scans this vista. It's quiet. There's the sound of the wind and God's loving presence that he's gone up to. Moshe ponders the many journeys that he's led the people through, from the mud pits of slavery to the cusp of conquest. And then and only then does God say, and I think with some gentleness, I'm sorry, but you will not cross this
Mhm.
Jordan. And that is where I want to just talk about this, the Hazeh.
Mhm.
What does that mean? What is the
Mhm.
reference to this Jordan?
I think there's something else. Moses is seeing the land for the first time. The last time a Jewish person or a Hebrew saw the land was the guys who went, the spies, who saw something negative. And what he's seeing is something positive, and maybe that's the pause.
Oh, well, that's nice. And it goes a little bit to the contentment.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I like
It's
that.
also the last time he communes personally with God, right? God makes this a sacred, it becomes a sacred moment.
So the very
I
end of
think
the
that,
program
yeah.
is a yet another retelling at the
Mhm.
end, and we won't have time to do that, but maybe another time we will. But go back to the end of Devarim, and it'll make you wonder, because that's the scene where Moshe goes up to the top and dies by the kiss of God, which is not
Right.
happening here. And then trying to like reconcile all those. Okay, so my reading of Hazeh, this Jordan, is I wonder if God is saying, you have led the people through many trials and tribulations, and you've crossed many Jordans, like in the way someone might say you've crossed Rubicons, right? You've crossed many Jordans, and you have crossed so many, but you're not going to cross this one. And so for me, I think it's a very subtle acknowledgement to the many achievements that Moshe had in his life and the many ways in which he was able to cross over. Anyway, go ahead, Annette.
Well, this is really off base, but I suddenly had a flash about immigrant parents who come to this country and toil and work in menial jobs so that their children can enjoy what those parents consider the fruits and the benefits of
Yeah,
this country. So the parents die without enjoying that, but then their hope for their children is that their children will flourish in this
that's
country,
beautiful.
which they idealize in a way that those of us born here
Yeah,
don't idealize.
yeah,
Perhaps.
that's beautiful, and I think really captures the spirit of Moshe. So I would like to sort of close this up here. And I want to do that by going back to the words of the Shabbat Amidah that we started with. Yismach Moshe b'matnat chelko. Moshe rejoiced at the giving of his portion, gift of his portion. So the question is that despite the plea of Et Hanan that begins this, did Moshe ever reconcile to the fact that he would not enter the promised land? Was he ultimately happy with his portion? The answer is not in the text. It's on that summit, on that Pisgah, and in this narrative. And I think it's left to our imagination to talk about that. But the words of the Shabbat Amidah are very definitive. The full passage says, Moses rejoiced at the gift of his portion when you called him faithful servant. A crown of glory you placed on his head when he stood before you on Mount Sinai. He brought down in his hands 2 tablets of stone on which was engraved the observance of Shabbat. So by these words, the tradition says that Moshe was ultimately content with his role as the giver of the Torah and Shabbat. Rabbi Art Green interprets the words b'matnat chelko, in the gift of his portion, as follows, seizing on a lurking ambiguity in the phrase in the gift of. Not that Moshe was satisfied with the gift he received, but rather that Moshe was satisfied in the giving by him of the gifts that he had received. Indeed, there's a midrash that says that as a young prince, Moshe convinced Pharaoh to give the Israelites the 7th day as a day of rest, ostensibly to make them ultimately more productive. Far better than leading the Israelites into the promised land, Moshe became our leader for the ages, who transmitted to us the gifts of Torah and Shabbat. We recognize those gifts each Shabbat when by tradition we are closest to the presence of God, and that's why they are in the Shabbat Amidah. Moshe was granted the gift of contentment with his lot, but he also granted us the living tree of Torah, a gift in perpetuity.
That's lovely.
The rabbis debate in the Mishnah the definition of a rich person. The definitive word on this is in Pirkei Avot, quoting Rabbi Ben Zoma, and many people will know this, Ezehu Ashir Hasameach Bechelko, who is rich? He who rejoices in his lot. You can read that word ashir with an echo of the word ashrei, right, which means happy are those. It's a different word root. Who is happy? Happy is the person content with what they have. The Buddhists would agree. The Four Noble Truths start with these two. First, suffering is inevitable. Second, suffering results from our craving, wanting more of this or less of that. And the implication is that acceptance, the absence of desire for something different, happiness with your portion, would eliminate suffering. As we read about the struggle of our greatest teacher and leader, Moshe, to reconcile with the end of his leadership, consider the aftermath of the 2020 election and Trump's pathological inability to do the same. The name of the book, written by Mary Trump, a psychologist, about her cousin and the warped upbringing that gave rise to this man who could not let go, Too Much and Never Enough. So, as we search for contentment, even happiness in our lives, Moshe's plea echoes to us. The rabbis draw from his example the wisdom that defining success as achieving a destination or a goal can leave us still longing on that final summit, looking at work undone. Will we be happy with the journey we've taken, with the gift of our portion? Wise teachers advise us that satisfaction with the journey arises from cultivating satisfaction with each step along the way. May we be content with these two truths. Our journey is all we have, and it is our choice to be content with it.
Mhm.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Yeah.
Thank you,
I'm
Rich.
gonna-
Rich,
Yeah.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you, Rich.
yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, because it's just a lovely ending.
Please. All right. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone. Have a great day.
Shabbat shalom.
Thanks.
Thank
for
you.
sharing.
Shalom.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.